Hello, everyone. I'm Elise Antrim from EBSCO. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the webinar, Avoiding Pseudoscience While Researching Food and Health. First, let's go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last about 45 minutes, and it's being recorded. If you have questions as we go, please go ahead and submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll follow up with folks directly if we're unable to answer all of the questions today during the session. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Senior Information Literacy and Outreach Manager at IFIS Publishing, Carol Hollier. Carol has worked in academic libraries in student and faculty-facing roles that involve teaching, research, and information literacy skills. She has been a reference and instruction librarian at the Ohio State University, an academic subject librarian at the University of Lincoln, and faculty team librarian supporting the School of Biosciences at the University of Nottingham. Her most recent role before moving to IFIS was senior librarian, teaching and learning support at the University of Nottingham. Carol holds a master's in library and information science from Kent State University, a postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning in higher education from the University of Lincoln, and is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. So, Carol, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Elise. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at this webinar. And so what we will cover today is we'll look at what predatory journals are and the different terms that are used to describe them. And also we'll look at the key problems that they create for students and researchers alike. We'll come away hopefully knowing how to spot predatory journals by looking for some of the most common characteristics that they have. And also, hopefully everyone will be knowledgeable about resources and tools that are available to help you search with confidence and to actually avoid pseudoscience. So, what are predatory journals? Well, you may well be familiar with Beall's list, and Jeffrey Beall, who was a librarian at the University of Colorado, is the first person to coin the term predatory journals and the first person to really look in a systematic way at the problem. And he actually compiled a list, Beall's list, where he would both look at the characteristics of them and say, have a running list of journals that he thought were predatory. And his list, the timing of this coincided with sort of the start of open access. And so predatory journals are not open access journals, but predatory journals thrive on some of the vulnerabilities that have been made available through the shift from a print journal publishing atmosphere to one where things are available open access and people pay an open access fee to make their work available in journals. And so they are preying on this system. So Beall started his list in 2010, and he actually stopped it in 2017. So Beall's list as such doesn't exist anymore, although you can find archived versions on the web, and you can also find people who say that they are continuing it, although without making it necessarily terribly clear about exactly what criteria they are using to put journals on it. But the characteristics that Beall identified as being key for predatory journals were the low price points for APCs, or article processing charges. So this is the charge that an author would pay to have their journal published. Not open access journal. A traditional journal structure is the author doesn't pay anything, but the user, so either a library who is subscribing to the journal or an individual, actually pays to read the article. So this is pay to publish rather than pay to read. And so he also saw that there were what were kindly called inflated commitments on behalf of publishers. In other words, publishers said that they were providing author services that they did not actually provide. And most notably, they did not provide proper peer review. So the whole structure of academic publishing is based on experts reviewing other people's work before it becomes available to the public. So it's scrutinized by people who know what they're looking at, know what they're thinking about, the person is doing, know the methods, know whether they're sound or not, give suggestions, give recommendations whether to publish or not. But with predatory publishing, an author can submit a journal, pay the fee, and get it published, the manuscript as is, without any of the safety checks from other experts about whether or not it's actually sound science. The websites of predatory journals will look like legitimate publishers. They want to look real. And a key factor or characteristic of them is that they solicit manuscripts by email. So they will say they'll send out emails and say, you're a great scholar, would you please submit to our journal because you're so good, which a normal journal would not normally not do because they've got plenty of submissions anyway. So if we want to look at a definition of predatory journal, I think that this is a really good one that came out last year by Simon Lineker. Predatory journals are deceptive and often fake, given the appearance of legitimate peer-reviewed journals, and impact academic stakeholders by exploiting the open access model while using misleading tactics to solicit article submissions. So that sums it up nicely about what it is that we're talking about. So, but they're not always called predatory journals. There are other things that they're called. So they can be called pseudo journals or fake journals or deceptive journals or shell journals. And unfortunately, there are a whole host of related problems that run parallel to them. So some of them, like predatory conferences and predatory books and predatory repositories, are just the same phenomenon with a different object. And predatory conferences especially exploded during the pandemic. When there were so many online conferences. But there's also a phenomenon of hijack journals where a legitimate journal finds that all of its subject matter is reprinted in a journal with a slightly different name, and somebody's claiming that it's theirs and charging for it. There's also paper mills, so where somebody pays to have somebody write a paper and submits it to a journal. There's a problem of the data in journal articles or research studies just being completely faked, so that it hasn't been done. They've made up the numbers. And then there's a phenomenon that is coming to light right at the moment where authorship can be for sale. So a real journal article, real research, sound research, probably peer-reviewed perfectly well, but somebody pays to get their name on as an author and they had absolutely nothing to do with the journal. So they get to bulk up their publication list. So sadly, there is a whole world of dicey publishing practices out there. So there's a question though, what's in the name if we go back to the different ways that we've referred to predatory journals? So is predatory the right word, or is it more appropriate to talk about deceptive journals or shell journals or something like that? And the reason why this is a live and important question is predatory journals give the impression that the authors, the researchers, are being preyed upon and being guileless and actually unknowingly paying to somebody who's promising to do something, the peer review that they don't, so they get the publication. But there's been really interesting surveys and reviews looking at why it is that authors actually publish in these. And it is true, sometimes they have no idea what they're doing. They don't really know that this is a phenomenon. And so they think that they're publishing in a legitimate journal. But sometimes they're doing it because there's pressure to publish. And this is a very easy route for having a longer list of publications. It's coming back more and more as people are more aware of this, though, as something that can come back to haunt an author, because it can be a real demerit or a worthless place to have your research, or actually one where you can be penalized if you have published either intentionally or inadvertently in a predatory journal. So the answer to the question of whether they're being duped or if they're willing participants is that there's probably some of both. So how does this happen? How has this become such a problem? It really is a combination of two things. So one is the publish or perish atmosphere that people, academics, need to publish in order to progress their careers. They need to do it a lot, combined with the open access publishing model, which has given people this space that they can step into to use these illegitimate techniques to make a lot of money. So how big a problem is this? It's actually an absolutely astonishingly huge problem. So, one scholar has estimated that predatory journals currently make up about 1/5 of the global output of scientific research articles. So if you think about that, that's almost 500,000 articles a year. And the money that's attached to this or involved with this has been estimated to be between about 75 and $100 million per year. And it's a a legal problem. The Federal Trade Commission actually sued one publisher for more than $50 million because of their deceptive practices, that they said that they were providing a service that they were not providing to authors. So it's a huge and sadly endemic problem in the scholarly communications world today. So why does this matter? There's a number of reasons why it matters. By failing to meet the publishing and editorial standards that they say that they're meeting, predatory journals can introduce into the scholarly record things like the faked data, errors, misleading information, flawed research methods, and plagiarized content. So there's all this stuff seeping into the scholarly record. And if we look at this sort of in a broader way, then we can think of the waste of university and funding resources. So Lineker estimates that at least $75 to $100 million has been paid in the APCs to predatory journals every year. And there's this contamination of the scholarly record. So this bad research is being cited in legitimate research. It's being believed by people who are not experts at all. And even when something is retracted, so removed from the research record, it still can have ghost traces, because if somebody's cited it or relied on it in some way in their own research, then it still exists in the research that used it. So this can cause, lots of problems, including the distortion of the evidence base for evidence-based decisions. So again, why does it matter? If we think about the motto that Google Scholar has adopted, they say they stand on the shoulders of giants, but what is it if you're actually standing on a pile of predatory journal articles? It makes it quite a different picture when you think about how the research, the integrity of the research record. So what do articles that are published in predatory journals look like? Well, they can look like a lot of different things, but this is one of my very favorite examples. Down here at the bottom of this Google Scholar search, you can see an article that's called "What's the Deal with Birds?" And it was published by an ornithologist who had gotten many solicitation emails from the Scientific Journal of Research and Reviews. And he decided to write an article for them. And he bargained with them that he did not have to pay a fee for this one if he paid a fee for his next article that he submitted to them. So he didn't actually pay them any money. This is the article. If you look at the abstract, it begins, "Many people wonder, what's the deal with birds? This is a common query. Birds are pretty weird. I mean, they have feathers." And then if you go on and look at the figures in it, you have things like this. Okay, there's a bird that looks like a fish. And then you have this one with a weird beak, and you have climate change. And then the intersection between them all is the deal. So this is a journal article that I think is pretty easy to recognize as not high quality, although brilliant in its own right. But sadly, it's not usually quite this easy to recognize an article that's been published in a predatory journal. So if we look at another one published in the same journal, the Scientific Journal of Research and Reviews, it's called "What Food Security in the Context of Global Warming, Case of Algeria." And it has giveaways that it's maybe not the most rigorous research. So the first reference is recent FAO reports, so that's pretty general. And then there's somebody's magister's dissertation. So again, there wasn't proofreading. There was not the rigor that one would expect in a scientific journal. But if we look at this one, this other article published in the same journal and actually in the same issue as the "What's the Deal with Bird" articles, it actually doesn't have any real jumping out at you giveaway clues that it's a problem. And so sadly, the problem with predatory journal articles is that they're rarely like "What's the Deal with Birds?" and they're much more often like this one about leaf extracts, where if you're not an expert, it looks like it could be okay. So what are the solutions for us for trying to figure out how to not use predatory journal articles either in our research or to publish in them, to publish in those journals? So there's basically 3 different approaches. There are lists, like Beale's lists, and then there are also checklists. So looking at the characteristics of them and making a judgment. And then there's trusted resources. So we're going to look at all 3 of these options. So if we look at lists, the great difficulty with lists, I think, is summed up in this quote, that predatory journals are continuously changing names and publishers, and they keep growing in numbers as we speak. So it's a big job to keep on top of what's a predatory journal now. What's the current list? So you can have lists, but are they up to date? They are not necessarily up to date. Journals do reform themselves. So, and they, if they make the effort to reform themselves, then they can sue you if you say that it's a predatory journal, and they can demonstrate that they're not. And so these are, in theory, a good idea, but in practice, quite difficult. There is one that many librarians will be familiar with. Cabell has two different lists. So they have their journal analytics list, which is basically legitimate good journals with lots of good information about them, about whether to subscribe to them, and for finding a home for publications, for manuscripts. And then they have the predatory list of things that they've done a rigorous analysis of and feel are suspected predatory. But these are subscription and mostly subscribed to at the library level. When we turn to checklists are mostly intended for people who are thinking about where they want to submit their manuscript. And so it's incredibly important not to submit your manuscript to a predatory journal. And think, check, submit, I think, is one of a really good checklist. They have lots of really good guidance on their website about how to think about it and things to look for. But it makes sense that if you are thinking about the home for the research that you've done, that you've spent an awful lot of time on, that will affect whether or not you maybe get a job or get a promotion, etc., that you are going to put the time and effort into really doing a big job about looking at this and figuring out whether something is likely to be predatory or not. But when you're doing a literature search and going through many articles, to go through this level of check for each journal article or each journal title is laborious. And so it's maybe not the best approach. I mean, if you have that much time, great, but many researchers won't really have so much time to be able to do that. So I want to take a moment to talk about the difference a little bit between a critical appraisal checklist and a predatory journals checklist. So there's overlap. This critical appraisal checklist is one that's specifically designed for food science literature, and has the kinds of questions that you ask to think about whether an article before you is a sound article and also appropriate for the project that it is that you want to use it for. But it's assuming that it's published in a legitimate journal. So it's assuming that the article has been peer reviewed. And so a predatory journals checklist takes a step back, and it's not assuming any of that. So this critical appraisal checklist would not necessarily be sufficient to catch something that has been published but looks fine. in a predatory journal. So what are characteristics that might help you identify a predatory journal? So these are some of the characteristics that we see listed a lot. That there's poor production quality and also poor grammar or or use of English. It's a common practice that they have fake editors. So that is to say that it's a real scholar who might really be an expert in their field, but they have no idea that their picture and address has been pasted into the website and they've been listed as an editor for this particular journal. And another characteristic that's often listed when you look around for guidance is that there's an extreme subject spread within the journal. So basically they're publishing research about everything. And another key one is that they publish things right away. So they accept them and a week later they've been published, which is something where it's hard to get peer review done so quickly. But this is a wicked, as one scholar has said, a wicked problem, because nothing around predatory journals is easy, at least most of the time. So when you look, for instance, at the broad range of subjects, here's a series of open access articles around a very broad range of subjects. So from graphene to lung cancer to astronomy, but these were actually all published in Nature, so which is a very, very legitimate journal. So that characteristic on its own is not enough. So there is the problem of the names. So it's one thing that predatory journals often do is they make their name seem very similar to a legitimate journal. So here's a list. The Preventative Medicine is the real journal. The Journal of Preventative Medicine is the predatory version where somebody said, let's do that. The same with International Journal of Public Health is the real one, and the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health is predatory, or the Archives of Internal Medicine is real, but the Archives of Medicine is predatory. So you can see that this is a trick that people play. So it might look like, you might think that it's the journal that you know well. You have to check that carefully. Then there's the question of the use of English language, and that you need to be careful about. It on its own is not enough, because there are journals that don't necessarily have the highest production levels that are completely legitimate, that might be based, for instance, in the Global South. And so you don't want to knock out a whole category of local journals without the same kind of resources, but the resources that they do put into it are around peer review and maintenance of the scholarly work that needs to happen to review the research, but maybe their website isn't as snazzy and their use of English isn't exactly the same as it would be were they native English speakers. So it's tricky. You can have the characteristics, but you can't go by any one characteristic. It has to be a balance of characteristics that help you decide whether something is suspected predatory and should be avoided, or if it's legitimate but maybe shares one of the characteristics with the list that might be predatory. And so the The other way that you can approach looking for excluding predatory journals and journal articles from your research is to use trusted resources. And one such trusted resource is FSTA. So FSTA is a database for food science and nutrition literature, scientific literature. It's published by IFIS Publishing, and it's available on the EBSCOhost platform. And so IFIS Publishing has a mission, and our mission is to serve the information needs of the food community. We've been around since 1968, and we're absolutely committed to supporting those who are working and studying in the sciences of food and health by making it easier to access trustworthy scientific information. And we see as part of our mission preserving the integrity and accuracy in the fields of science, food science and nutrition. And so we actually put a lot of resource into this. To give you a quick sense of what it is that you'll find in FSTA, everything in FSTA anchors on food, and it's published, we find the publications in different formats, so patents and reviews and academic articles, but also standards and theses and reports. And because food science and nutrition is very multidisciplinary, so is the content. So food is the anchor, but it goes out into all sorts of different directions where the research about food is being done. So from food safety to nutrition to genetics to packaging to consumers to engineering, and the information is we find it where it is, which means that there are some journals that are index cover to cover, but then there are a lot of other journals that we go and find those articles that are pertinent to food science and pull that into FSTA for the researcher. And so you can see it's available as full text. There's FSTA with full text on EBSCOhost. And there is, when you search in there, there's a little bit of information about predatory publishers within the field, especially of nutrition. So how to understand predatory publishers, and then the policy statement for the Journal of Human Lactation about when those references have been pulled into a legitimate article. So, but because our focus is on food rather than publishing, you can see that if you did a search about systematic reviews in child obesity, you'd get a lot more results. So FSTA as a database is curated by our editorial team. And we do this so that we will be, and we are trusted by researchers, scientists, and students, as well as government bodies in over 150 countries across the globe. And a very important part of the editorial team's job is vetting our sources. And so we do this for quality, both to make sure that they're within the scope of the journal, but also to exclude predatory journals, so that we help researchers and students avoid fake science. So we're actually going to have a poll here so you can see what you think maybe the quantity of this predatory journal is that we deal with. So in the 5-year period between 2017 and 2021, the editorial team excluded 147 suspected predatory journals from FSTA. And so now I want you to think and answer the question of articles from how many of these journals do you think can be found on PubMed? So 24, 44, 96, or 146. So if you could answer the poll, please, then we'll see what people guess. Okay. Aha, so there's a range. So it looks like 12% of people who answered the poll thought that 24 of those would have been on PubMed, and 21% thought 44, and 35% thought it was 146. So the answer is actually in PubMed, it's 44 of the journal titles had articles that were included in PubMed, which is a little bit worrisome because PubMed is something that you would hope would be more reliable than that. Okay, so let's do the next question. Okay, so thinking back to the 147 journals that were excluded from FSTA, articles from how many of those journals do you think can be found on Google Scholar? Aha, okay, you did really well. The answer is 146, so which is appalling. So if you think back to Google Scholar and building on the shoulders of giants, it really is a little bit dicey. You're building on the shoulders of giants, yes, but you're also building on a pile of trash. So it means that it takes a whole lot more work from somebody doing a literature search to vet what they're getting back themselves to make sure that they're actually getting quality research. So this just reviews the numbers, but how do we do it? Our editorial team works from a 60-point checklist. And so these are just a few of the things that they will check, but there's many, many more things that they go through. And it takes them up to about 6 hours per journal to go through all the steps and make a decision about whether or not the quality is such that it should be included in FSTA. And that's 6 hours from people who do this all the time, who do it quickly, and who are real experts. So it's something that we really do put a lot of our resource into to make sure that what you find in FSTA can be trusted. So we also at IFIS Publishing, besides producing the database FSTA for researchers to use to find high quality, safe information, we have something that we call the Predatory Journals Hub, and this is on our website. And so it gives guidance about how things you can look for and how you might be able to identify journals yourselves that you want to avoid. So some of the things that I talked about today, but with additional resources. And I just want to point out also that for those people who are able to subscribe to FSTA, that we have a free online training tutorial that anybody can take. And it is designed to get people to be able to use it to its best advantage through this self-paced course. So it's got 3 parts, and it has what's in FSTA, but also what's not in FSTA. Things like what it is that you're actually searching when you search. So you're searching records rather than the full text, and how it is that indexing works. So how does controlled vocabulary help make your search better? And once you complete it, then you get a certificate that certifies that you've actually done it and tells how well you've done. So it's something that could easily be built into library training or into a module. Students could be asked to do it, as well as anybody demonstrating that they have mastered a basic level of search skills for using FSTA effectively. And so finally, before we get to questions, I want to point out a few of the resources that we have from IFIS Publishing. So here's the link if you're interested in the training tutorials for using FSTA, but also whether or not you have FSTA, we have a guide that is best practice in literature search for the sciences of food and health. So this is to give you an introduction and a good guidance on how to do literature search, not randomly, but to do it systematically and comprehensively, and to judge the results that you get back. And then also, if somebody's at the point where they're ready to publish, we have a guide to getting published in journals, which includes information about avoiding predatory journals, which of course nobody will want to be publishing in, and also the Predatory Journals Hub that I just mentioned. And finally, I want to recommend a little bit of reading. So Simon Lineker has this relatively new book, The Predatory Effect, which is a freely available open access book that is really interesting if you have time to read it. It's a little bit less than 100 pages. A much shorter read is this article by Naomi Oreskes, Predatory Journals that publish shoddy research put people's lives at risk. So that's something I didn't even mention, but it can have like not just like the pollution of the scholarly record has implications that are absolutely terrible. And finally, if you're not familiar with Retraction Watch, then it is a website, but also a blog that you can read that will keep you up to date on issues that plague scholarly publishing, including the problem of predatory journals. And so now I'd like it to open it up to questions. And it does look like we have a few already. And so I'm going to take a second to look at them. So, okay, so one question that we got was, would FSTA or IFIS select an index for indexing an article by a reputable scientist published in open access predatory journal, or would it be ignored? So we exclude things by the journal level. So if it was a reputable scientist who had published in a predatory journal, then because that journal was predatory, it wouldn't be included in the database. So it really, that's yet another reason that people who are publishing their research really need to be sure that they're publishing it in a reputable journal. And so another question is, well, this is a question of that I don't know how to answer. So how many so-called predatory journals are indexed in other databases? So Every once in a while, there will be a news article, especially if you read Retraction Watch, where you will find that some major databases will have the discovery of some predatory journals with articles indexed within them. It's a really hard problem that all publishers are up against, all legitimate publishers are up against. And they generally take action to remove those when this happens. I can't tell you exactly like how many journals are indexed in places like Biosis or Chemical Abstracts. I'm sure that they are also trying very hard to exclude them. The chances are that the more subject-focused databases, in a way, the easier it is to exclude the journals. So citation databases that are really broad, like Web of Science or Scopus, have far more journals titles that they have to keep track of. And so we have many, many, many journals in FSTA, but they, because their subject breadth is so much larger, we'll just have that many more. And so I think it's more likely to be a problem for one that is broader than one that is very subject focused. And so there's a question of if I think students can identify predatory journals. And I think that students could probably identify the predatory journals that are, you know, really, 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 really poor quality. But as soon as you get to the ones where it's hard for even a researcher to easily and quickly identify it, then I think that probably most students wouldn't have any chance in identifying those. Another question, which again is a really difficult one to answer, is how often articles from predatory journals are cited in normal peer-reviewed publications. And do any peer-reviewed journals have policies against citing articles from known predatory journals? That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it, but I think it's an excellent research question. The result that we saw about the Journal of Human Lactation, if that was the journal that it was, policy is one that would be worth looking back at to see what their policy is. So clearly people are thinking about this because it's so obvious that it taints the legitimate research. Yes, I got a question about whether we are going to share the recorded video. So yes, we will share it. I think there will be a little bit of a delay, but not too long. But that will be coming by email. And I think that's the questions that we have. So unless there are any more, then I'd like to thank everybody for coming.
Thank you, Carol, for your presentation. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Have a good day.
Thank you.